President Trump held his second meeting with the German Chancellor Angela Merkel today. Meanwhile, Europe's migrant crisis continues unabated, accelerated, if anything. Tens of thousands of migrants are still crossing the Mediterranean Sea, and recently Austria remilitarized its Alpine border with Italy in order to prevent mass migrant arrivals there. Douglas Murray has thought a lot about this. He's the best-selling author of The Strange Death of Europe, and he joins us tonight. So, Douglas, I guess the obvious question, the president meets with Angela Merkel. Has her position on migrants softened at all? It seems to have totally overturned the politics and culture of her country. Has she rethought her views on it?
It certainly has overturned the politics of her country. She imported an extra 2% of the population into her country in a single year in 2015. But, you know, last year when she did badly in regional elections, she suddenly said what was reported as an apology. It actually wasn't. She just said, I wish we'd been better prepared for what happened. But, you know, the consequences of what she did in 2015, of opening basically the external borders of Europe to the world, anyone who walked in could get into Europe, is still being felt all the time. You just mentioned, I mean, 12,000 people came into the Italian islands alone just last weekend. This has consequences across the continent. As you mentioned, the Austrians sending troops to the Italian border to reinforce it. Just this past week, the Danish intelligence service said that the major threat to their country comes from the thousands of religious extremists in Sweden. Now, those aren't, you know, crazy Calvinists who are kicking off in Sweden. They're the people who've come recently into Sweden at Angela Merkel's invitation.
There was a New York Times piece today about the president's speech in Warsaw, and in it, because it's basically one long editorial, that paper now, they took a dig at the Polish government for not allowing the migrant flow that Germany and Belgium have. Central and Eastern Europe seem to be holding a line against this. Do you think they'll continue?
Yeah, they have. It's one of the most interesting things about this I remark upon in my book. Western Europe and Eastern Europe think totally differently about this. You know, a right-wing Prime Minister in Hungary and a left-wing Prime Minister in Slovakia are absolutely as one on the fact they don't want to take in millions of refugees and migrants. They don't think that it's the job of their countries to be a home for anyone in the world who wants to walk in and call their countries home. I don't think that's going to change. And by the way, that sneering of the New York Times and other papers, I mean, they should really reflect on the fact that even some of their sort of cherished figures are starting to realize this. A very interesting development this week. Bill Gates gave an interview to one of the German papers. Now, Bill Gates in 2015 said that America should take in migrants at the same rate that Germany had. But just this week, in a change of tone, Bill Gates said in an interview with a German newspaper that actually Europe obviously cannot survive with the rates of migration that it's got at the moment. And he said, you know, you've got to find a way to stop the boats landing. Now, if everyone is starting to realize this, why don't we start to think now about the ways to solve this? Because, as I say in my book, you know, there are a whole load of things we should have been doing from the beginning. And it was inevitable that people would realize this was a catastrophe, but we have been woefully slow in waking up to it. And I think that the lessons that America in particular has to learn from this are incredibly striking.
Yes, and routinely and assertively ignored by our policymakers, which is why it's so nice to have you on tonight. Douglas Murray, thank you.
Great pleasure to be with you.